Welcome to a special episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. I've received a number of messages from people in the Brown University community in Providence who are confused and worried about why this mass shooting investigation is taking so long and why 72 hours after two students were killed and 9 were wounded inside a classroom on campus, a shooter has still not been identified or arrested. And if you turn on cable news, any of the cable news stations, it seems like, have a cryogenically frozen police chief or federal agent who they roll out to do quick 30-second snippets or 60-second snippets. But that doesn't really explain the complexity of the situation that we're in, the priorities during a complex homicide investigation like this, as well as a lot of the limitations with security systems and evidence collection that people don't understand. So I have the perfect guest for this special episode today. Retired police chief Patrick Flannelly served 27 years, 10 years as the chief of his department in Indiana. He's the host of the Coptimizer podcast. I've been a guest on his show. It's an excellent program. So Chief Patrick, thanks for coming on today to talk a little bit about the logistics behind this investigation.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me. And I guess the first thing that I just want to say is it's unfortunate that we're here talking about another tragedy. And, it sounds cliche, but thoughts and prayers to the victims of this tragedy and all of those that, that really suffer on the periphery. Because these incidents, they leave scars that last a long time, not just for those who may have physically been injured, but also for everyone that's involved. So it's unfortunate that that we have to have this another one of these conversations. But I think you and I talked about that previously when we got into some discussions about public safety and the challenges that we face.
Yeah, definitely. And to kind of frame the challenges in this area, so Providence, Rhode Island is an urban city. It's about 200,000 people. Brown University is 20,000 of the people in that town of 200,000. For reference, I looked up State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State is. State College has a population of 40,000 people. Penn State has 90,000. So the resources of Penn State, with the size of their police department, with the size of their campus infrastructure, is significantly greater than the municipality because they're more than double the size of that actual town. Here in Providence, Brown University is about 10% of the size of that town, but it's still a huge campus. It's one of the first 9 colleges in the U.S. It's consistently a top 15 school in the country, an $8 billion endowment. And within that downtown Providence area that has rivers running through it, it's urban brick-lined streets, it's open access for anybody to drive through. It's a 143-acre campus, an enormous campus that is about a quarter of kind of downtown Providence. And they have 235 different buildings. And why I note that is because these buildings were built between 1770 and 1926. So this school has very, very old infrastructure for kind of the foundation of the campus. So immediately after a shooting, you hear discussions about security and policing and why aren't there more police? Why isn't there more access control? My first question for you, Chief, is what's your realistic security when you have 235 different buildings that 20,000 students are going in and out of in the middle of a bustling downtown area?
Yeah. Well, and I guess just for a little perspective for the audience, I live in a very similar community. So I personally live in West Lafayette, Indiana, which is where Purdue University is located. And I was the chief of police for the Lafayette Police Department, which is a larger metropolitan area right across the river. So, in the county area here in this metropolitan area, it's a very mixed and diverse environment where we have industry on one side of the river. We've got the university on the other. We have both cities, and then we have really just growing metropolitan population surrounding that. So the university itself sits inside the city of West Lafayette, and they share a lot of property. The university itself has grown also from 40,000 students to close to 55,000 students. So you have the university properties with all of the academic buildings, and then you have residential buildings, you have dormitories, you have fraternities, sororities, and then you have the city environment mixed in there. So you can start to kind of see the challenge. So while just one caveat right off the start, I was a metropolitan police chief. I was not a university police chief, but we have a very close relationship in working with all of our partners inside of the county. So we had unfortunately, a homicide that happened on Purdue's campus just about a decade ago. That every time I see one of these, it reminds me of that incident where we sent a lot of our resources over the river to go support the investigation. These are very fast moving, and what we say in really any investigation, the first few hours can be very chaotic. They can make or break a case, but they're also very difficult to manage because information travels very fast. And even in the 10 years or so since that incident here at Purdue, social media has only grown, and the number of networks have only grown, and the alerting systems have become more and more complex. So it's really just a long way to say that I think you framed it up very nicely in that it's a very complex environment, and complex environments coupled with a complex incident can take time to unravel and really kind of get to the core of what happens. In the case here, they caught some very good lucky breaks, or I shouldn't say lucky, but there was just information that was known a lot sooner because as it turns out, the motive was pretty clear. In this case, we don't really know what the motive is at this point, or maybe the investigators at this point do, but they need to protect some of that information in order to maintain the integrity of the investigation. So that's, the other thing I want to say is, like, I was an administrator for my last decade. So really my concerns were really big picture in terms of how do we manage our messaging? How do we manage our community? How do we message and ensure that all of our resources are aligned properly? And that's very different from being an investigator where you're hands-on with the case and working from the scene up. I like to say this, there's a lot of criticism about law enforcement in the U.S., but policing in America has never been better. I think we're really good at criticizing and critiquing it, which is good because that only serves to improve our services in the long term and improve our capabilities. But I guess in the maybe to sum that up, it's just the wheels of these investigative processes sometimes turn slowly, and they turn at their own pace. And that pace oftentimes is in conflict with what the citizens might want or even expect. And sometimes the expectations are shaped from unrealistic portrayals of what the police are actually capable of, what technologies we have. And it's going to be a little bit different everywhere you go based on resources and jurisdictional boundaries. And even some, in this case, maybe even, how, MOUs and everything else like that line up. So there's a lot I don't know about that, but.
Yeah, before we get into the investigation itself, which I have a number of questions for you on, from your experience in Indiana being around Purdue, traditionally, what types of functions and capabilities does a university police department have compared to what a municipal police department would have?
Well, it's going to vary again differently based on how the university structures it. But in Indiana and at Purdue specifically, they are fully sworn, fully staffed police department. So they have all the same capabilities, powers, arrest powers, investigative powers that a municipal police department would have. So it's now their environment is generally going to be a little bit different, right? Because you're policing a population of primarily students and your staff, and then you have the interactions with your local community. We have the West Lafayette Police Department, which is also a fully staffed municipal police department. So there is a lot of overlap there, and those two agencies work very well together. On top of that, we work inside of a county environment, which also has a sheriff's department that is a fully sworn police department, and we're in the state of Indiana, so you have the state police resources. Some states are a little bit different. They have like highway patrol versus investigators. In Indiana, all our state troopers are fully sworn police officers as well. So there are a lot of resources, and they come in layers, but specifically the university itself is fully capable of running a homicide investigation in-house.
Now, would you
oftentimes
traditionally
they'll
have,
ask, right?
yeah, would you traditionally have like your crime scene investigation and detectives and so on that are working in universities? And think about Brown, where it's a pretty low crime area around there, and you have about 20,000 students, 8,000 of whom are older graduate students. And as I have seen some comments about this, and why didn't Brown have more resources? Why wasn't the campus police department doing more? From my interactions with colleges, traditionally your campus police are kind of your proactive, visible security. They're also the party police. They're dealing with nuisance, littering, trespassing, laptop thefts, a lot of things like that, where your traditional municipal police department is dealing with kind of more violent crime, more ongoing investigations, kind of larger scale investigations.
Yeah, that's a great summary. And the environment is going to dictate what you want your staff to do and where you want them to focus their priorities. There are some university police departments across America that work in metropolitan areas that are adjacent to high crime areas, and so they have to build their capabilities to be able to support what their needs are going to be based on their environment. And again, every case is going to be different, and it's going to be dependent on the resources that you do have, the comfort level that you have in the experience, and the capabilities of your teams. And that's not a knock on like an individual. It's just a practical reality of where you spend your time and what's the best way to use the limited resources that you do have.
And I mean, with that, it's because you have different needs. A campus police department at a school like Penn State knows how to deal with 100,000 people on campus for a football game every weekend. Your municipal police department might only have a special event like that, once every couple of years. So it's different requirements, and that's going to kind of drive what you do there. Aside from this Brown case, just putting your police chief hat back on, there's a homicide that happens. It's not a high profile homicide in the sense that you have national, international media covering it. Maybe there are a couple local news reporters that are kind of getting on the beat. What are your priorities for your department for the first couple hours and then the first day or so of a homicide investigation?
That's going to be pretty similar regardless of where you are, right? I mean, obviously when you get there, it's, life safety is always your number one priority. You want to make sure that you're securing the scene, that if there is someone that needs immediate medical attention, that you provide that. So, from a training and a resource perspective, those are all things that your first responders have to be prepared to do. Sometimes your patrol officers are going to be the first ones that are going to arrive on scene in a university environment. It might even be student patrol. It might be security personnel, depending on, again, how that's structured. Um, so, outside of your, rendering medical aid, you're certainly you have to secure the scene. You have your primary and secondary crime scenes, everything, um, and that just requires training, discipline. And I think sometimes where universities or smaller municipalities, even us at times, we're, even though a mid-sized department, very busy, we handle a lot of shootings. We didn't have a lot of homicides, fortunately, but there are times when you might not have a resource that you need, but this is where your networking and your relationships with your surrounding communities and your surrounding agencies come in, because we can build these teams that are multi-jurisdictional that can come in and help and bring in specific uh, skills, resources that an individual department might not have, or they just might not need to have on a year-round basis, because everything that you buy, everything that you purchase, everything that you train for, that requires continuing education, continuing updating. So everybody wants to have these base level of capabilities, and then you want to be able to supplement in where the gaps are. So, yeah, first and foremost, secure the scene, preserve any evidence, make sure you're capturing everything that you can, your witnesses, and beginning to then start working on some of your secondary scene management processes.
Now, in this crime scene at Brown University, it took place in a large lecture hall. Reports are there were more than 100 students or so in there at the time of the shooting. You're going to have a lot of students as they were fleeing and moving around that are trampling around that crime scene and potentially disrupting evidence. And then with 11 different victims, 7 of whom were critical, there's going to be a lot of blood. There's going to be first responders, moving them around. All of that is going to do a lot to kind of degrade your forensic evidence right there in the room and in the hallways and around that building. What is the priority of the investigators, the folks from the FBI, the folks from the state police, from the Providence Police Department that are kind of working in that building for, that first 24 or 48 hours?
Yeah, and I don't want to speak, very to specific to what their priorities are, because again, I don't know what their setups are. Just generally speaking, you're exactly right. And again, the number one priority is to stop the threat, secure the scene. We need to make sure that there's no additional outstanding threat. So a case like this, when you don't have a suspect that's in custody, whether it's because they've been neutralized by law enforcement or a bystander, or they've committed suicide and ended the threat themselves, this creates a significant challenge from a communication and a coordination perspective. So this is where training in advance and having these multi-jurisdictional training exercises really comes in handy. And now, fortunately, things like this don't happen very often. The unfortunate byproduct of that is you don't get a lot of repetition in these environments. So trying to really manage that first hour, that chaos that unfolds, because if you think about just what you said, we have two victims that were killed at the scene, seven other that are shot and wounded, and then you have all the other bystanders. So what's the first thing that people do after they run? Is they pick up their phone, and either they start recording, they start calling friends, they call 911. And so your dispatch center is going to get immediately flooded with all these emergency calls. And so now your professional staff there has to start sorting and categorizing and prioritizing that information. And you want to be able to capture everything that's critical right there. And then based on the redundancy of how some of these systems work, when a 911 system gets overrun, then they're designed by default to start pushing off into secondary PSAPs. So calls start rolling into other 911 centers that aren't getting answered in the primary. So now you start to have all of these calls coming in. And for the challenge for the initial responding officers is that that means descriptions are going to be highly variant. We just don't know. So you really kind of have to take everything that you see as a potential threat until you can discern that it's not. Hopefully you can really get some good, clear, clean information early, and that can help you make some good decisions early. But the longer it takes you to kind of sort through that, the more complicated the circus becomes. And it's not as easy as it sounds. It's a very difficult thing to manage. Now, cops, and I'm sure that they did a fantastic job with this, and I'm sure that they'll debrief it after the fact. But some of the issues that we run into in these situations are so many people pick up their phones so fast and start calling that even the phone systems will drop and go down. So now you're adding another layer of communication issues. So the primary radio networks become very important. We have, and you know this subject very well, right? Now you have people that will start self-responding to the scene. You have emergency responders from all over the area that are going to self-deploy. You have others that are being directed by policy and SOP. So it really becomes a process of making sure that you have good incident command, good structure set up, and you can start to establish what these working priorities are going to be. And again, in this, everything is going to be evolving around, first and foremost, try to save as many lives as possible, try to prevent any other lives and injury from occurring, and apprehend the suspect as quickly as possible, if possible. But again, like, this is a perfect example of where the suspect has a say, and they have the advantage of knowing, particularly if it's someone that's taken some time to plan and thought through. And generally, the ones that don't plan very well or don't think it through very well, they don't make it very far. But some others do, and I could think of a dozen things, right? Examples right off the top of my head, but Parkland, I think, comes to mind, right? All the student had to do was, join a group of students fleeing out of a stairwell, and it took a long time to sort through. So that,
very similar to what happened at University of Nevada, Las Vegas last year, where there was a shooting by a professor who had been denied a job there. So he was targeting some faculty members, and he was, just dressed like a university professor. So as the police were coming into the building and they were searching for the shooter, but also ushering people out, there was an officer that escorted this guy, like walked him out of the building, because he didn't look like a shooter. He just looked like a man in his 60s. And then when he drew his gun on an officer outside, that's when the officer fatally shot him. But he didn't look like what you think of as the school shooter. He didn't have the leather jacket and tactical vest and, gloves and sunglasses on. With this guy, I think so many people have watched CSI and other crime scene shows that they just assume that there's DNA everywhere. From the pictures that have been released, this guy's wearing gloves, he's wearing a surgical mask, he's wearing a hat, he's wearing a heavy coat. It's a large lecture hall where if there were 100 people in there at the time of the shooting, there are probably hundreds of people in and out of that building every day, which means that every single table and door and window and surface is covered in fingerprints, is covered in bits of hair, is covered in, drops of saliva and so on. That's a very challenging environment to try to recover any useful DNA evidence from. What would you say to people kind of about their expectations that, the guys come in with the blue lights and the swabs, and then you're going to, stick that swab into a laptop and it's going to pop up a picture of your suspect?
Yeah, I mean that can be really frustrating. The one thing that I will say for sure is I have a high level of confidence in policing all across the country that they know exactly what they're looking for. They're going to capture what evidence is likely to be there, and they're going to start processing it immediately. Uh, Cases like this are going to go to the top of the list, so to speak. But we could get into sidebar conversations about how busy labs are because this is a high profile incident, but I'm sure the labs there in their region are probably have a 2-year waiting list to process some of the evidence because that's how much stuff is coming into these centers all the time. Um, but yes, those expectations are really difficult to manage because, for instance, one of the things that I know we'll probably talk about at some point is cameras. And we sometimes have the belief that every location, every ingress and egress is going to be covered by a camera. And not only is it going to be a camera, but it's going to be one that's a modern camera that's 4K, 8K, that has sufficient optical zoom and other capabilities that will allow you to capture a high resolution image that then allows you to try to uh, find the best images, not only to share internally with your investigators and with the responders as quickly as you can. We want to push those things out as quick as we can, so the officers know what they're looking for, who they're looking for, and have a general idea. But then also to be able to run these things through, your secondary and tertiary um, filters as well. Um,
Yeah, and I think just to
and
break on the security camera point for a moment, because people outside of the security industry don't, you hear security camera and you think it's capturing everything, but cameras all have very different purposes. So your pole mounted cameras that are usually on streets are primarily there for traffic monitoring. They might be able
right,
to see a person walking by, but they're not going to see a lot of detail because the goal of that camera is to have the broadest view possible of as much of the street as possible, so you can tell if there's some sort of traffic interruption. On a place like a college campus, oftentimes you'll have high mounted cameras on the outside of buildings or on poles to be able to see a courtyard, to be able to see down a pathway. And that's more about just being able to keep track of what's going on more than really identify a specific person by their facial features. And then where you do have really high resolution up close cameras are places like an ATM, where you go there, it wants to be able to validate that if there's some sort of fraud, this was logged in with your ATM card, but we've got a high resolution picture of this person who's not you, or if you're being robbed at the ATM. And then somewhere like a retail store, you might have cameras coming in and out of the doors and entrances to be able to track who's there. You might have a camera right at the register. But if you just have a regular campus building, you probably don't have a high resolution uh, face level camera at every door in and out of that building because there's not a reason for it.
yeah. And I don't know how much more I could add to that, but you're precisely correct. I mean, it's one of the challenges that we face, and one of the things that we discuss in every new project when at the municipal level is when buildings are being built, when new infrastructure is going in. How do we plan for the future? Um, it's not as simple as just, hey, we're going to build a new business district, so we need to put some streets in. It's um, where's the water lines, where the sewer lines going, how far are they? Do we need to build new pumping stations? Where's the power coming from for your stoplights and all of that infrastructure? Are we running fiber? How are we going to connect? Can we add cameras? What's the cost of these things? And it's really the same, I think, for any environment. And that's one of the cool things about universities is that they're little snapshots in time. They have just beautiful architecture, beautiful history, like Brown I've never been to that campus, but I've heard it's a beautiful campus. And when you're trying to add new modern infrastructure to that high security, capable cameras, different networking, that becomes an infrastructure challenge, and everything is an added cost.
Yeah, well, those
Now,
buildings
there's
built.
ways around that for sure,
Yeah,
but
I mean, those buildings that were built in the 1770s, many of them in the 1800s. You have historic preservation codes that you have to keep
yes,
up with, but you also have the logistics of the old style of solid concrete or solid stone construction doesn't have the built-in pathways to be able to run wires through it as well. So it can be a cost item too, where with a brand new building, it's really easy to just add security cameras to your plan. If you have 2 feet of concrete in every single wall, every single camera that you're installing might be a $20,000 item that requires a special permit for each one of them.
yes, and then the processes behind that. So it's not as simple as just throwing a new camera up. Um, with that being said, there are challenges that we do need to overcome, and there are things that we do need to plan for. It's I know people get very frustrated when a crime does occur. Let's say it's in a quick stop gas station or a convenience store, a shopping center, something like that, and the police push out a video or they push out a still image that looks terrible. Like nobody can tell what it is. And that's generally the best that they can get. Some of the older cameras that are even analog cameras are, very low pixels, which means very low resolution. And so, that CSI effect that we talk about is, in these television shows, especially even 15 to 20 years ago, there was this magic computer that you would throw the image in and it would pixelate, and within 30 seconds suddenly what was really blurry now is a crystal clear face or a really clean image on a license plate. And that's just not, that's television, that's fantasy. It's not real.
Yeah, I think
The
it
good
shows like 24, where Jack Bauer is yelling at the analyst to enhance, enhance,
Yes.
and somehow magically this really wide angle of an entire street is getting a tattoo on somebody's arm. That doesn't exist. A manpower question for you: the 4 images that are all being made public now in videos look like they all came from doorbell cameras. What's the process and kind of what's the time that goes into getting that kind of doorbell camera footage?
I'm glad you brought that up because it's a really interesting topic. As security cameras started to become more and more prominent about 20 years ago, um, law enforcement really, like, if we had a crime that occurred in a neighborhood and you don't have any eyewitnesses, one of the first things that we would do is canvass the area. We look for cameras that are in that area and look for people that can share. Um, every state is going to be a little bit different, and then every company is going to be a little bit different. I think generally speaking, the one that is most prominent that people that hear about now is Ring. And in the post George Floyd era, some of these companies caught a lot of flack because of their partnerships with first responders and public safety, and it was really disappointing because it's not like you can just call them up and they'll give you any image that you want. There's really tight processes that have always been in place to protect uh, privacy and make sure that we navigate those things effectively. But thankfully, some of those relationships are have been reestablished. I think people kind of realize that, wow, we're missing good opportunities to solve crimes. It doesn't make by not sharing that data, it doesn't make our neighborhoods and our communities safer. It actually makes them less safe, because anyone that's going to go out and commit crimes and commit victimization generally will continue to do that until they're stopped, until they're arrested, or some other some other intervention occurs. But that's generally arrest. So the good news is that I'll just use Ring for an example. They have partnerships with different public safety software providers. I know, for example, that they do work with Axon and others. So for record systems and RMS systems on the back end, we can create these networks where people can opt in to share information. Or if in that area, what we would be able to do is send a message out to these neighborhoods and be very specific about what we're looking for. We can say, in this case, there was a shooting in this building at this time. Here's the most that we know about this suspect. We would ask you to check your cameras to see if there's any information on there that would match what we might look for, or what we might be looking for. And I don't think I'm giving away any like investigative secrets by sharing this. And what I hope to get from this by sharing is more people being willing to engage with their local police departments to share that information with them. And sometimes it can be as simple as an opt-in from an email or through an app where they can share that almost instantaneously. And so as AI becomes more prolific and these technologies evolve, we have really tremendous opportunities to capture some of this data sooner. And sooner, the sooner we get high quality information, the more actionable it becomes. And the more actionable it is, we can be very specific and intentional about how we're going to deploy our resources. That can change the way that we decide how we're going to use those valuable human assets that we have that are coming to that scene, to try to sort through the thousands of pieces of information that are going to be coming in. So yeah, and those cameras are good. They're good. A lot of them are very high resolution. I, for one, I've been using a Nest camera for a couple of years. I like it. I think most people, and I live in a very safe neighborhood, but it's great to have that out there because you just never know. I mean, what you might capture on it.
So I recently heard an interview with the CEO of Nest talking about a new feature called Search Party, where any user would be able to opt in to have their camera. If you upload a picture of a missing pet, AI will scan all of the cameras in the geographic area that are opted in and then identify that pet on the footage. That is a feature that could be very useful for this if you have a preliminary picture of the suspect and then you're able to match them on every camera. It also goes down kind of a dystopian path of constant surveillance very quickly. So, that's something that we have to kind of socialize and think through. In this one, putting kind of your investigator hat back on, if all you have is 4 very grainy pictures of your suspect, you've put a call out to the public with those pictures, you're offering a $50,000 reward. What are your next priorities in the investigation? What should people expect?
Well, there's a lot of other work that's going to be going on behind the scenes, but you're trying to get to, you're trying to skip rungs in the ladder. And the way I talk to our Citizens Academy and our other community members about these processes and just processes in general, if every investigation is a 100-foot ladder and you have to hit every rung, you have to hit every rung, and in order to be thorough, if you can get really good pieces of high quality information, that might allow you to skip some rungs. So that shortens the amount of time that you can reach the top of that ladder. And that's the investigative process in a nutshell. The sooner you get that good information, the more potential you have to catch a break and, in this case, identify who the suspect might be. But, these are the challenges in the post-COVID world, especially in winter, just like you mentioned earlier. Masks are normal. It's not abnormal. 10 years ago, people would pay attention to someone wearing a mask. Now everybody's wearing masks. And it's winter, it's cold. So big puffy coats. Oftentimes they look very similar. Sometimes it can be a challenge to get billed and things like that, or other personal identifying information out of that might be easier to use. And again, investigators are always, they're going to hold a couple pieces of those things back to make sure that they don't compromise those processes that they're going to have to follow. Because one thing that can derail an investigation early is too much information too quickly getting released, and then you get flooded, and now every lead becomes something that you have to chase down, and it's really hard to sort through that. And there's only, and again, you only have so many people, so that is a very real challenge. And um, again, I think just being a little bit patient. I generally won't even begin to follow these cases now until 2 to 3 days after, because so much information that gets shared early is often incorrect and wrong. You can really send yourself down a lot of different rabbit holes. But to go back to the camera thing real quick, one of the advantages about some of these AI tools that are evolving that I want people to really consider is that actually they tend to be more accurate than human accounts. And you can be very specific about what you're looking for and why. And that tool can sort through thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pieces of information and filter to investigators the ones that they should start with. And that can save time. If you were to just to say, I lost my dog, or my dog's lost, and you don't have a description or an image, or it's a black dog, then next thing you know, everybody on Nextdoor or Facebook or whatever is going to be sending in pictures. Oh, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? And somebody has to sort through all of that. And I'm definitely not trying to make light of that. I do think it's an important thing, and a very critical piece for solving not just a case like this, but even quality of life issues and stuff in neighborhoods that oftentimes get overlooked.
Yeah, it
A
makes
lot
me
of
think
domestic
back to the
violence. Yeah,
yeah, to the Washington D.C. Sniper investigation, which went on for about 20 days in October 2002, and that was two men firing from a vehicle at random people in random places. One of the early clues that went to investigators, it was a white van. So all of a sudden, every white van and box truck in the DC area was being stopped every time somebody saw one. They were, calling the police about it, and an enormous amount of time for about 2 weeks of that investigation went into the white van. When
yeah,
you think about it, any given street, pretty much any place, some of these were taking place at gas stations, in a Home Depot parking lot, in a mall parking lot. If you look around, there's probably a white work van in just about any large parking lot anywhere. So that one detail is what people became fixated on. Ultimately, it derailed a lot of resources. In this case, when we really don't know who the suspect is, the preliminary images are likely the suspect, but you're not sure. One of the risks right now is that key details that somebody did see or remember are quickly fading. And anybody who's there in Providence, once you're seeing these images on TV, they're going to replace whatever your true images were of maybe that person that you saw on the campus the day before, or maybe the person who you saw circling this building the week before. Those memories are now going to be less and less accurate. And the challenge with interviewing witnesses, now that we're more than 72 hours after the shooting, is going to be a big challenge for these investigators.
yes, and more information is going to continue to pile in, and so that just creates layers to to the complexity, and it makes it very difficult. We had there's a small community just 10 minutes away from us here, Delphi, Indiana. Many people are probably familiar with the Abby and Libby case, like two young girls that went missing, were later found murdered. But that case, it went unsolved for years, and it was just kind of a perfect example of how critical those first 24 hours can be, and how easy it can be for leads to get missed when the investigators get buried in a mountain of tips. So it's hard. It's hard to tell people not to contribute or to report something that they think is important. So there always has to be that fine balance between we want to share the information that we think is going to be helpful to solve this case or lead us in the direction where we need to go, uh, without sharing too much that creates that avalanche, or creating too, or sharing too little where it doesn't really help at all. And then people, go down their own paths, all the internet sleuths and everyone else starts to go to work. And then these, again, managing information and social media, it's such a challenge these days. And, you know, that's, that's all part of the process though. So that's where I do think, uh, it's going to be important for not just universities, but businesses, municipalities are really going to have to take a hard look at some of these emerging technologies. I mean, I do, in full disclosure, I work as what they call an Axon ambassador. I'm a firm believer in their products. They're very forward thinking. They've taken a very cautious approach to how they're going to implement and utilize AI tools. But if you think about this case in particular, when you start thinking about enterprise systems and how do we create an umbrella or a canopy of safety in areas where we expect a high level of safety, it doesn't mean that you can prevent incidents from happening, because suspects always have a say in what's going to happen, and they always have the upper hand because they have the advantage of time and planning. But when you do have these networks now with high quality cameras, integrated license plate recognition technology, maybe the use of facial recognition, maybe the use of ShotSpotter, or which was, going back to your DC case, ShotSpotter technology evolved from that case, trying to identify, because they were having such a hard time zeroing in on these suspects. They had to start putting up listening devices to try to capture the sound of gunfire. And now that technology, sadly, out of a tragedy, some really strong technology evolved from that, that's been deployed around the country. And we saw a pullback on some of that. And cities like Chicago went away from that technology, very unfortunately. But that's one little piece of technology in a layered security network that can help us solve these crimes. Now you throw in drone technology, cameras that are not just on your police officers, but also on security personnel, maybe even certain classrooms and teachers. Like, there are these networks that can be set up. So when something like this does happen, a gunshot could set off an alarm that activates cameras in an area that zeroes us in. So not only can we determine is this an actual incident, but we can, uh, in very near real time, start making better decisions about what resources that we do need. Oh, maybe it's a false alarm. We can shut down the networking, the messaging system that's going to go out to the entire campus and the entire community. And I know you and I have talked about stuff like that in the past. So it's disappointing when you see stuff like this. And I know the community, it creates a lot of angst and anxiety when you haven't made an arrest quickly. But at the same time, not every case is there. Every one of these cases is different, and they all have their own challenges. And sometimes it's just going to take a little bit of time. And
So
then
my final question for you on this: sun sets in Providence at 4:15 on the day of the shooting. It took place at about 4, so the guy's walking from the campus as it's dusk. None of the surveillance pictures released are from after. So this guy in dark clothing and a mask and hat, you're not really going to have realistically any usable CCTV of him leaving the campus because it's dark at that point. We're 72 hours out from the shooting. It's clear that there's not a great suspect identified yet, or else they wouldn't be releasing additional kind of pictures to the public. Unfortunately, when you look at crime stats, about 42% of homicides are not solved. A number of them take, a number of months or years to solve. Kind of, what would your message be to the community as this progresses from maybe 3 days to a couple days to a week, to let people know kind of what's still happening in the background, um, even if there's not somebody who's arrested in the near future?
Yeah, I think first piece of advice is really just as difficult as it can be. You have to let the process play out, and you have to trust your law enforcement that they're going to get it done. And it now is not the time to be critical. It certainly doesn't mean that you can't evaluate after the fact what could have been done better, but we don't want to blame individuals for sometimes what might be systems problems, and the fundamental attribution error, right? We try to find somebody to blame really quick about why this didn't happen. These are, they call them VUCA environments for a reason, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, so many things to navigate. So I just know that uh, our law enforcement investigators, they've never been better. And when you can start to bring in the resources from around, the Providence, from around the state police, from the FBI and others, they're going to get everything that they need to solve this, but they still need information to be able to work from, pieces of evidence, things that they may have there. The reason we like to share uh, images and stuff like that is because oftentimes, the Charlie Kirk is a more recent example of, initially the a suspect or a potential suspect was detained, and everybody's focus went right there. And in outside of the law enforcement circles, you may just assume that everything else is stopped because we think we've got the right person, but that's not what happens. You continue to work everything until you know for sure. Like, we definitely, if we think we have a good lead, sure, we're going to put some resources on it and we're going to run it down. But we're also going to remain open to what other potential, uh, investigative pathways we may need to go down. And in that case, eventually it was a piece of information from somebody in the public that broke the case. And that's oftentimes what happens. So it would be surprising to me that if somebody now doesn't know who the shooter is. There's no such thing as a secret when two people know. And if somebody has an inkling about who may have done this, that they would have proximity, then they need to say something. Don't hold back. Don't think that, oh, well, gosh, it's probably not. And I don't want to accuse or blame somebody that may not be innocent. Let the investigators, let the professionals sort that out. And if say something and share that information. Even sometimes I'll go back to this bridge case, and the man on the bridge. There was just a small little piece of audio that was released in that case where the suspect was saying down the hill. There was a gate that was captured in that. So just the way the suspect moved and the sound, those things, they can lead to good leads, and they can help solve cases. So that's a long way of saying, just trust the process. If you know something, share it. Otherwise, this is a tough one, right? Because it'd be hard to feel comfortable in this environment, knowing that there is a suspect still at large, especially if we don't know what the motives are. And, is it a politically motivated assassination? There were some reports out now that the suspect may have been screaming Allah Akbar, which adds a whole new complexity and layer to this that will complicate things for the investigators. But all those little pieces of information, they're important, and they can be helpful to help solving it.
Well, I want to thank you for that. I think the final note to the audience is no piece of information related to this is too small. And if you do witness a crime, if you can't take video, take some notes of what you saw immediately, because your memory will fade very quickly and be replaced by a lot of things that didn't actually happen. I'll have a
Yeah.
link to the Coptimizer podcast, which is Patrick's regular podcast about policing and optimizing policing, because it's the Coptimizer podcast. And I think it was a perfect guest to have today because I did not realize how closely he worked with a university police department. So, Patrick, thank you so much. I wish we could talk in better circumstances, but I appreciate all of your expert insights on this today.
One final comment, and just in closing, it's the technology is emerging really fast. And when I would really encourage community members, when they see emerging technologies like facial recognition and license plate recognition, we do want to protect our civil liberties. I'm a firm believer in that, but we don't want to do it at or cost ourselves some potentially valuable technology by not taking the sufficient amount of time to learn how it's going to be used, what protections are going to be in place. Because this is just another example of about why some of these companies that are coming into the public safety space are working really hard with first responders to help develop technologies that we can solve these issues. I mean, this was a terrible weekend, right? We had the incident going on in Australia. You had even just a celebrity was murdered, and in that case, police, all these things are different, but at the same time, they're all interconnected. They're related. And what it boils down to is we need the very best people working in policing. So we need really high quality candidates to come in, and then we need to resource them adequately. We need to invest in not just the equipment, but the training and the technology and everything that's gonna optimize them. So go back and listen to that episode that you and I talked about. I think there's just a lot of correlations to what we were talking about today. And again, my prayers to those that were affected by this, and my prayers to all the first responders that are out there working this. And I got faith in my brothers and sisters in blue, and I think they're going to get the job done. We just got to give them time to get it done.
Perfect. Well, I'll drop a link to our previous podcast if anybody is interested. We talked all about incident management, training, communications, quite a bit in there. And I think we had promised to record a second part because we never even got to the topic that we wanted to discuss that first time. So, Patrick, I'll hold you to that. And until then, thank you all for listening today.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Have a great day.